everyone, welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today I thought it would be interesting to discuss something that I think is really widespread and already that a lot of people know about, but I kind of want to delve into the topic of this book a little bit differently than what usually is discussed for my Book Review Wednesdays. And since we are in the month of love, and this famous play is sort of revolving around the concept of love as being part of its themes, I thought it would be interesting to address Romeo and Juliet, as you probably see by the title. This is probably Shakespeare's most well-known play. If you were to look at the Shakespeare library, what is the first thing that comes usually to mind? Romeo and Juliet. Now, I think some people, when it comes to, in particular in this day and age, in particular our generation, they seem to be divided on the play. They seem to either gravitate towards it or not as much. And I think there's reasonable understanding for this, but I think what we should emphasize here and clearly emphasize throughout as I am explaining Shakespeare grew up in a way different time period than the one we grow up in today. So obviously there's going to be social and different ways in which people interacted, different ways in which people interpreted various things. So there was a whole different culture centered around the audience that Shakespeare was trying to initially appeal to. So obviously our generation is not going to see Romeo and Juliet the same way that the 15th, I believe it was either 15th or 16th century saw Romeo and Juliet. It might have been 16th. I'm horrible with dates, but I know it's within either of those centuries. Basically, the biggest thing that I think a lot of the younger generation doesn't particularly gravitate towards the play is the fact that Romeo and Juliet do kind of love each other initially, basically at first recognition. Again, aka love at first sight. And also the fact that Romeo, just a couple scenes later, was getting over this one girl that supposedly broke his heart. So, yeah, I can understand how there might be some issues with that when it comes to the way in which we interpret love. But again, what we have to understand here is that Romeo and Juliet is not a realistic play. Things don't play out fairly realistically, and they don't really, again, they're all designed on drama, on emotion. They're not designed on rationale. And so I think this is why people mistake Romeo and Juliet and think that somehow it's doing a disservice to love because it's not realistic. Trust me, you can gravitate towards the emotional. There's nothing wrong with that, just as long as you do the emotional well. And I think Romeo and Juliet as a play does the emotional aspect really well, especially with Shakespeare's writing. Yeah, that's something that I think is important to note. Also, I think there is this underlying dislike for, in particular, teenage rebellion. Especially probably a little bit the older generation who feels that, that Romeo and Juliet were just rebelling against their parents and that they were, and that, they tried to, compensate the sort of hatred that was going around with them by sort of falling in love. And again, there could be some argument to that, but I think, here, I think Shakespeare treats the teenage rebellion as sort of a celebration even though it does end in tragedy, again, he sort of conveys it in a way that shows that the parents are really not that involved or invested in their children. For example, Juliet's family, you will see this when they have a scene, and basically the mom's calling out for Juliet because she has no idea where she is. And also the mom has a maid for her child, who basically is like her replacement mom. So it really is established within Shakespeare, and what Shakespeare's approach was is that when you don't have parents who are involved, and if you don't have parents that care, usually children are going to end up taking rebellious means, and also not really being for you or being for what you want, because um, they feel like you don't really have their best interests. And really, if you think about it, the marriage that Juliet was set up for, that was basically for her own parents, because that's what her parents wanted for her. They didn't care about her needs or what she wants out of life. No, they want to marry her off. And so I think this was Shakespeare's way of saying that if you treat your children kind of like children and don't help them grow into fully capable human beings and don't make them a part of your life, they're obviously going to rebel, and probably their life will be a shorter one because of it. And that's what we see eventually sort of happening within the play, um, which I think is something very important to note. And I think people skip over this teenage rebellion like it has no meaning, and that these teenagers are just whiny. I don't think they're whiny. I think that they were just in a lifestyle that didn't really, um, that again, didn't really care about them, didn't really think about what they wanted out of life. It was always about what the parents wanted, and it was again all about tradition, um, all about the parents' choices, and at the same time, again, the parents really weren't raising their kids, in particular Juliet's family, because they do showcase the mom clearly not caring about her daughter and clearly replacing her job to take care of her daughter with a nanny. So that is I think something that's fairly clear in the play, and I think Shakespeare did a good job of displaying it in a subtle way that even I noticed it, and I think it is a main reason as to why Juliet was sort of against her parents. Um, and even though Romeo's family is um, not that is not showcased as much as Juliet's family, you do still feel like that there is this kind of rebellion to him. And again, where is his family? I mean, his family, it doesn't seem like he's there all around that much. I don't. I think they show up at the end of the play, but I don't think they're. And again, maybe a couple scenes here and there, but I don't think they're in it for all too long. And the first thing that Romeo does to go to counsel for love advice is not his father or his mom. And again, it's not like, he had to say, "Hey, it's Juliet." He could just say, "Oh, I really like this girl. What should I do?" No, he goes to the monk guy right away. So, um, or priest, I believe he's either some kind. He's part of the church. Let's just say that. Um, but yeah, I think that's something that's very important to note. That there is this sense of that these children don't have a huge amount of good influence in their lives, and that largely their lives are based upon other people making choices for them. Um, so, and I think this is partially why Romeo and Juliet sort of fall for each other, because they feel like nobody else cares about them or really appreciates them all too much. Um, or that most of the time, other people, they care more about themselves. So when they fall for each other, you do kind of understand a little bit why that could be, even though it's not depicted in such a realistic way. Um, and I think this is an also a underlying tragedy too, sort of similar to what I mentioned before, is the fact that these aren't fully grown adults yet, and the fact that they go to such lengths is just something that um, I don't really see happening within teenagers today, or even with adults today. Um, and I think it just shows you how, when there's no guidance, um, when there is no sense of development, um, things can end up tragically, and ultimately you don't end up growing up. And I think that's what happened with Romeo and Juliet. So again, it's kind of like that great tragedy, so to speak. So again, and there's this whole other stupid argument that again I'm gonna have to address, because it's a part of the argument and it's part of the playing field here when it comes to the Romeo and Juliet story. And some people like to say that they just were horny for each other, that they didn't really love each other, that it was all just teenage hormones and all that. Totally disagree. I think it's both. Um, because there is this level of care that they give to one another, and they talk to one another, and they lament. Two people who are just horny are just gonna meet up at a party, get drunk, whatever, and then after they're done, they leave. There's no future relationship, there's no marriage, there's no, again, lust is fleeting. Lust isn't designed to stay all too long, because again, it is not a lasting emotion. It's just a within the moment emotion. And then afterwards, no future investment. Love requires, again, a little bit more investment. And this couple was willing to get married. This couple was willing to, again, they do have conversations, okay? It's not like, all they're doing all day is bumping uglies. They're actually talking to one another. And they also seem to have a certain level of maturity, but at the same time they do make it clear that they're teenagers, and they do make it clear that yes, once they're married, they bump uglies, but that's okay. And again, it was more culturally accepted at the time. And again, also, I think just because of the fact that what they end up going for to such extreme ends at the end, I don't think lust would really drive people to that end. I don't think losing somebody whom you didn't really care about and wanted to use for your own ends, you would suddenly commit suicide for in order to be with that one person. I just don't see it happening within a lust context. If Juliet woke up and saw, oh, Romeo's dead, oh well, gotta find me another hunk that I can, um, so again, I think the whole idea that it was just lust, I think that is stupid, because there's so much proof that is against that idea. And also, again, people around this time period got married at a younger age, okay? They got married when they were in their teens. That was when children got married most of the time, and usually that was the time when the hormones are starting, and that's when parents invested into them finding mates, because that was the cultural norm. You would have a woman and a boy and a girl coming of age, you would have them marry. Usually women were married off to much older men. But again, that all just kind of depended on, his standings and all of that stuff. Again, there were probably those, again, who were able to choose their partners more freely than others. I'm sure the lower class, it wasn't such a huge deal because, again, they don't have all these social pressures back then, because if peasants marry peasants, it's like, yeah, of course, yeah. who else is gonna marry my daughter or marry my son, Okay, but when you were like of their standings, like Romeo and Juliet were, and had those sort of social pressures, then obviously there was a lot more pressure for the girl or the boy to marry the one that the parents thought was the best match. And usually that was financial. But again, not every couple operated that way back then. But that was sort of the cultural norm. And it was normal for women to be virgins before they were married. That was just the common norm. Oh, it denies such biological and blah, blah, blah factors. I don't care about that. What I care about is what Shakespeare was doing with his play and how it reflects the time period. That's how it was during the time period. Women stayed virgins until they were married. That's just how it was. And if you don't like that, then don't read Shakespeare. Or read Romeo and Juliet. But again, and they were trying, and again, I think this is what it's important to the play. I think Romeo and Juliet were trying to get away from those expectations that were probably put on them, to be married based upon, again, other people's ideas and thoughts and feelings, and their rationale. But again, it was a social thing. This is how things worked and operated. So that's how, and again, they didn't have things like birth control back then. They didn't have things like, where people literally were able to, get a career probably in the same way that we can get a career now. Obviously, the gender roles were probably a little bit more, defined than what we do now, and maybe a little bit more stricter, but that's how it was. And I don't think Shakespeare tried to sugarcoat that aspect in any way, shape, or form, and I think that plays a huge role into the play. And again, it's not like when, Romeo and Juliet get married and then they have their union, that all of a sudden Romeo or Juliet's like, okay, I want a divorce. Okay, yeah, let's go get a divorce. So again, I think to boil it down to just mindless teenage lust, I think is stupid, because I don't think that, again, people would go to such ends for lust when again it's it's such a fleeting emotion, and it ultimately doesn't end up amounting to much, as opposed to going to such lengths. And again, they're pretty much marrying their enemy. I mean, why would you go through that if you're just horny? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, because there's always another pretty girl somewhere, and there's always another handsome dude somewhere. I mean, makes no sense in that context. So I think there was love, genuine love and care that they had for one another. And again, they do have conversations. Their conversations are more emotional, and they're not really based within that rationale or the way really couples talk to one another, but it's just, again, fleshing out all of that emotion and putting it into the play. But that's all I'm going to say about that topic. I just think it's pointless to argue it. It's just, but that's just the way I see the play. And And again, I think even though they don't display love in Romeo and Juliet as so deep in the sense that, wow, we really relate to this couple like they would be in real life. That's not what this play is designed to be. It's not designed to be a real life story. Um, it's designed to be an emotional story, and in doing so, convey a lot of power, and a lot of passion. And I think that's what Shakespeare's intentions were for the play. It was to make it grandiose, make it just give it this emotional meat. Don't put logic into it. Don't put any political intrigue in it. Just show these two people who love each other even when their sides, their families hate one another. And that even throughout all of this, hating each other for really stupid reasons. I mean, they don't really go into explaining the reason really why these families don't really like each other to begin with. Again, stupid, shows the level of stupidity the adults have, and actually how the teenagers are actually the smart ones, who actually garner some kind of peace, and love from one another. Again, that shows the amount of weight that Shakespeare was trying to give to this story and drama by weighing in these two opposing views while at the same time providing this emotional, love-filled center. Um, the interesting thing too about Romeo and Juliet as a play is that it's been adapted and interpreted various different ways, and again, some of those interpretations have had a lot of recognition over the years, and some of them have kind of fallen by the wayside and are a little bit dated. But what I like about Romeo and Juliet is that it takes risks, especially for Shakespeare's time. Suicide, again, what happens within the play. Suicide was considered something, it was considered basically an all evil. You committing suicide was like, it's like denying the life sort of that God gave you, was the Christian sort of interpretation of it. That going to such lengths, to end your life was a horrible thing and a disgusting thing and should be shamed, and you should be damned for it. And that's really the greatest tragedy about Romeo and Juliet, and really what Shakespeare and people that were living in Shakespeare's time thought when it comes to suicide. They thought that if you committed suicide, you would go to hell for eternity. Okay, you would be burning and in torture and in pain and in all kinds of agony. Again, that was the interpretation. That was really when it was really during a time period when we did get sort of hell defined, and there was a lot of God fearing ness. It sort of started with the fall of really the Roman Empire, but again, it evolved so much to the extent of where we get the later Middle Ages and the Renaissance sort of art. We see hell being depicted in art and in culture. And back then, it was people were literally told up until birth about the Bible, and like, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, it's bad, and you'll be damned for it. And the fact that Romeo goes to the extent that he does because he believes Juliet is dead, and again, I think, and again, I think it's indicated that, I'm trying to envision if this is correct, but I believe, from as far as Romeo's perspective is concerned, I believe he believes that Juliet did kill herself because she did realize that she wouldn't be able to marry Romeo. And so I think that's why he thought she died. Um, and so therefore he commits suicide when really she isn't dead, and she wakes up and then she commits suicide. So again, that sort of, I think, explains to why he would be the one to initially commit suicide, because he thought she did, even though she didn't, and then she commits suicide. It's a very confusing rectangular suicide mission here. And yes, and again, I don't endorse suicide. I don't think what they ultimately did was necessarily right or ethical. But again, that's not Shakespeare's intentions to show Romeo and Juliet in this ethical way. It is to show how their messed up lives and how they were surrounded by all of this, you know, petty nonsense between their families ultimately resulted in their demise. And again, that was sort of the idea that Shakespeare, I think, had. But again, that was sort of, I think, the initial idea of that sort of tragedy, that, you know, they both commit suicide, not just because they will be with that person in death, according to, again, the way their culture and how they were raised, but also that they would be in hell together. That they would be burning in agony and in pain because, again, they committed suicide. But again, they did it for one another so that when they do die, they can spend eternity together, even though it will be painful. According to their culture, according to their understanding of how life and death works. So yeah, I thought it was interesting to point that out, because one of my English professors did point that out, and I thought that was a really good point. And if I ever make a Romeo and Juliet video on YouTube, I figure, why not bring that up, because that's very important. And I think that's really the great tragedy, is the idea that the person that you love is going to be in pain for the rest of eternity. And if I have a choice, I would rather spend eternity burning with you than, just live a life and then go to heaven and, you still be punished. So that was really that's the great tragedy of Romeo and Juliet. And I think people miss that for some reason. They like to say, oh, how horrible, suicide is, and wow, they actually killed each other for one another. And it's not just the act of the suicide, it's the aftermath of a suicide, because suicide was really shamed upon. It was not seen as something as, glorified, and I don't think even within today's culture we consider suicide as obviously the best options to solve people's problems. But I did have a feeling, though, that they did feel that there was limited options left for them, because, I mean, why live a life of misery? Why go on, being surrounded by people who are constantly hating each other? Why live that? What's the point of that? So again, it's trying to tie in all of these things about how, their lives around them were pretty much not as interesting, and also the fact that, their families are constantly jabbing one another. Don't know if I would want to live in that environment. Probably would want to run away. And I think Julia's plan initially was a good one, even though it ultimately had unfortunate ends. But again, that's what Shakespeare does. He completely turns the story 180 if you haven't seen the story. But again, those are all of the things that I think I wanted to that I wanted to address when it comes to this video. But In case you have not have heard, if you are probably one of the 5 people maybe on this planet that has not read or has not heard of Romeo and Juliet, basically it is about it's a play about 2 teenagers, a boy named Romeo, a girl named Juliet, who fall in love even though their parents hate each other, and they eventually end up committing suicide at the end. And I won't give away how it happens, but that's an essential part of the story. And I'm more discussing Romeo and Juliet in the sense of the broader things, because I think it's just such a commonly known play. Even if you haven't read it, you are going to probably read it at some point in your English class. I mean, I don't know what English teacher would skip this one over, because pretty much my high school, they covered it. So I'm sure they'll cover it in probably every school around the United States and abroad. But again, I think it's very important to note these points that I have addressed, because I think we like to read Romeo and Juliet in only a certain way. And I just like looking over sort of the positives and the negatives. Yeah, I think inserting a Rosalind in there, I believe that's the name of Romeo's before Juliet lover in the way beginning, I think was kind of a really odd and strange thing for Shakespeare to do. But again, not everything about Romeo and Juliet is great, and not everything about it I think is bad. I think there's a lot of good, and there's a lot of strange choices that they make that I think they could have, altered out. But I think ultimately Shakespeare's intentions are served well in this play, and I think he wrote it out as a means to convey that emotional bond, even in such times of huge amounts of hatred. And as a result, those extreme ends have extreme outcomes. And yeah, I think that's the greatest tragedy when it comes though to Romeo and Juliet, is the fact that the suicide back then was not only considered frowned upon, but that in death you basically would be tortured for the rest of eternity. Except this time you would have the lover there with you being tortured. It's not the most pleasant love story, trust me. It's not. It's probably one of the more depressing and one of the more, like, jaw-dropping, because I don't think there was any. There might be other ones that have showcased lovers committing suicide, but I don't think in this way or on this level that I've seen. Again, I think we see more of sacrifice than we do suicide. But I think the suicide in this case was sort of a sacrifice in a way. Even though, again, I don't endorse what they did, but I sort of understand it through, again, the cultural, because of the cultural factors, as well as the fact that they had so much misery surrounding them, and the fact that they just wanted to escape and live a new life was, I think, something that was justified for them. And I think they thought too that suicide would be a means of escape for them. I mean, heck, they'd be in hell, but at least they would be in hell together, as opposed to not being together on Earth. So yeah, that's all I think I can ultimately say about Romeo and Juliet. don't want to go any more into it because I think I've pretty much explained everything that I wanted to explain. But yes, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.